Morning sunlight filtered through the cream curtains, casting golden lines across the living room floor where Mara Nwachukwu sat, tea in hand, her mind a million miles away. At 34, she carried herself with the quiet elegance of someone who had seen too much but chose silence over drama. Her life with Dominic had once felt like a soft song, a blend of laughter, plans, and whispered dreams shared under threadbare sheets. But now, years into the marriage, that music had died down to silence. Dominic was no longer the man she had built with. He had become someone she barely recognized, a man of stature, charm, wealth, and growing absence. "You're always so quiet," people would say. But what they didn't understand was that silence wasn't weakness. It was her armor. The house was large now, with cold granite floors and wide staircases that echoed footsteps. It no longer felt like home, just a symbol of Dominic's success, a success she had helped build. He was rarely home, always off at meetings or conferences, coming back smelling of expensive cologne in hotels that didn't belong to them. And when he did speak to her, it was with the detachment of a man entertaining a mild inconvenience. Still, Mara said nothing. She cooked. She worked. She smiled politely at dinner parties and declined interviews when reporters wanted to speak with the wife behind the mogul. Because what was there to say? That behind every spotlight he enjoyed stood a woman who had sacrificed her inheritance, her father's memory, and her voice to build him? She knew, and someday so would they. Dominic had always known how to speak to Mara's heart, not with grand gestures, but with carefully placed vulnerability. He would sit beside her in their modest apartment and map out his dreams with a fervor that lit up the room. "I just need one big opportunity, Mara," he said one evening, eyes brimming with hope. "Your father's land, it's prime property. If I use it as collateral, I can finally get the funding." She hesitated. That land wasn't just a plot of earth, it was a piece of her father's legacy. Her father had worked his whole life to own it, and before he passed, he reminded her never to treat it lightly. But Dominic placed his hand over hers gently. "I won't let you down. This is for us. I just need you to believe in me the way you always have." It wasn't the plea that moved her, but the look in his eyes, that desperate hunger to rise above their circumstances. And so, against her instincts, she said, "All right, Dom. Let's do it. Together." The legal transfer of the property was quick, too quick. Dominic insisted on handling the paperwork himself, claiming he'd already spoken with a lawyer who would streamline the process. Mara had questions, but he dismissed them with kisses and promises. "We'll still be co-owners. It's just in my name temporarily. The bank needs it that way," he said. She nodded, though her stomach turned uneasily. But love, in those moments, drowned caution. The day the papers were signed, he hugged her tight. "You've just changed our lives," he whispered. Mara looked at the documents again, lingering over the line that bore only his name. Her father's signature used to live on those deeds. Now it was gone. Still, she told herself it was a worthy sacrifice. What mattered was the future they would build together. She didn't know that the very moment the pen left the paper, a different kind of man emerged in Dominic, one who now held power, unchecked and undiscussed. One who had just secured his empire's first brick, not in his own sweat, but in the quiet trust of his wife. The first 6 months after the land transfer were a whirlwind. Dominic's proposal was approved by the bank, and the loan granted within weeks. Soon after, the construction of his first office space began on the very soil that Mara's father had once walked barefoot on. Mara was there every step of the way, helping him pick vendors, balancing spreadsheets, negotiating with suppliers, and even typing out business proposals late into the night. She often skipped sleep, ensuring payroll was processed on time or client calls were returned. Dominic, meanwhile, began taking more meetings alone. "You handle the back end," he'd say. "You're better at it." Mara accepted the arrangement. She didn't mind being the foundation. "You're the face, I'm the hands," she'd often joke. But what started as humility soon turned into invisibility. Whenever news outlets featured the new tech startup revolutionizing logistics, Dominic was always the solo image in the spotlight, shaking hands with investors, speaking at forums, taking credit without hesitation. It was subtle at first, the way her name faded from the conversations. At company events, when employees asked, "Who designed our client onboarding model?" Dominic would smile modestly and say, "Just a bit of late-night thinking." He left out the part where Mara had spent 3 sleepless weeks perfecting it. At a business awards ceremony, the MC introduced him as a self-made visionary who started with nothing but grit. Mara had been seated in the 3rd row, heart thudding, wondering if Dominic would correct the narrative. He didn't. He simply accepted the plaque with a grin and a wink to the cameras. At home that night, Mara asked softly, "You don't think it would have been nice to mention me?" Dominic laughed, removing his tie. "It's not that deep, Mara. You know what you did." "I know what you did. Must everything be public?" She smiled faintly, but went to bed with a quiet ache in her chest. The empire was growing, but so was the space between them. Her name was becoming a whisper in the very empire she helped breathe into life. Dominic no longer kissed her goodbye in the mornings. Some days he didn't even speak to her unless it was about something he needed. The man who once clung to her hand and said, "We'll build this together," now barely acknowledged her presence. When she set down his meals, he ate while scrolling through his phone. When she asked how his meetings went, he answered with clipped phrases. "Fine. It was all right. Nothing much." She stopped asking. Their once shared routines, cooking dinner together, walking in the evenings, praying before bed, vanished without ceremony. He now dined out more than he ate at home. His cologne lingered on his clothes long after midnight, and Mara noticed the way he quickly changed shirts when he came in. Sometimes he'd receive a call, glance at her, and step outside to answer it. The house, once filled with shared plans and soft music, now echoed with silence. And still she said nothing. Not because she didn't feel, but because she was starting to see him for what he truly was. She kept herself busy, expanding her freelance projects, organizing the company archives from home, even assisting a few new entrepreneurs on the side. But Dominic never asked about her work. Not once. One evening, as she sat folding laundry, he came down the stairs in a black suit she hadn't seen before. "You're going somewhere?" she asked, glancing up. He didn't meet her eyes. "Event. Last-minute thing. Don't wait up." Her heart tightened. "Want me to come?" she asked softly. He paused, then smirked. "Not really your kind of crowd." The words stung more than she let on. She nodded and returned to folding his clothes, pressing the collar of a shirt he'd wear to charm others, while his wife sat in the shadows. Later that night, she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her side of the bed still cold. She wasn't sad, not exactly. Something deeper had settled in her spirit, not grief but recognition. She was no longer part of his future. But what he didn't know was that she was quietly preparing hers. The change didn't go unnoticed. People talked softly, cautiously, as though afraid their voices might carry into Mara's fragile calm. At Sunday service, the pastor's wife, a woman with sharp eyes and a soft heart, leaned over after the benediction. "My dear, are you okay? I noticed you sit alone these days." Mara smiled and lied. "He's just busy with work. Things are fine." But as she walked to her car, she caught the looks from the other women in the congregation. Sympathy masked as politeness, concerned curiosity. Even her best friend Amaka had started treading carefully. Over coffee one afternoon, Amaka finally said what had been dancing on her tongue for weeks. "Mara, I'm not trying to upset you, but someone I know saw Dominic at a lounge in Abuja with someone." Mara didn't flinch. She stirred her tea slowly. "The client, I'm sure." Amaka leaned in, voice low. He kissed her, Mara, on the lips, in public. The cup in Mara's hand stilled mid-stir, the teaspoon clinking once, then falling silent. She didn't react the way Amaka expected, no outburst, no tears. Just a small, tired exhale. "I've known for a while," Mara said quietly. "I just didn't want to see it." That night, she didn't confront Dominic. Instead, she sat at her desk and opened an old journal, the one she used when they first started dating. Flipping through the pages, she paused at a line she had written years ago. "If he ever stops choosing me, I hope I have the strength to choose myself." That sentence lingered in her mind like a prophecy. She began listing everything she had contributed to his company, not out of bitterness, but as documentation. Receipts, emails, dates, transactions. She created a file titled "Just in Case." The whispers had confirmed what her silence had tried to suppress. And as the wind of gossip carried new truths to her ears, Mara made a quiet decision. If this marriage was truly crumbling, then it would fall on her terms, not his. It happened on a Thursday evening. Dominic had just left the house in a rush, forgetting his second phone tucked beneath a stack of documents in his drawer. Mara wasn't looking for it. She had only opened the drawer to find a pen. But when her eyes fell on the sleek black device, unfamiliar and cold, her breath caught. She stood motionless for a moment, staring at it like it might burn her. Slowly, deliberately, she picked it up. It was turned off. She plugged it into a charger and waited. The screen lit up, no password. Her heart raced. She sat down, bracing herself for what she already feared. The first message was barely a day old. "You're all I think about." "She's clueless." Mara clicked through the gallery. There were pictures, hotel rooms, dimly lit lounges, the same suit Dominic had worn 2 nights ago, and voice notes. That was what finally made her stop breathing. She pressed play on one of them, hands trembling. Dominic's voice came through, clear and laughing. "Honestly, I used her. She gave me her father's land like a lamb to slaughter. Can you imagine? And now I'm swimming in cash. I mean, she doesn't even know what she's worth." Another voice laughed back, a male friend. "You're mad, bro. That woman deserves sainthood for putting up with you." Dominic chuckled again. "She's boring now. Predictable. I need something more. Alive." Mara sat frozen, the words echoing louder than the laughter. Every sound cut through her like a blade. She could taste metal in her mouth, a strange mix of nausea and rage. Yet when the recording ended, she didn't cry. She downloaded every message, every voice note, every image, and emailed them to herself in a folder named Assets. Then she turned off the phone, placed it back exactly where she found it, and walked out of the study with the same grace she entered. Her hands were steady, but her soul had shifted. He thought she was clueless. He didn't know she was documenting the war. The words kept playing in her head long after the phone was off. She doesn't even know what she's worth. They followed her as she washed dishes, folded towels, organized his files. That single sentence, uttered with such cruelty, wasn't just betrayal, it was erasure. All the years she stood by him, the sacrifices she made, reduced to a laugh between men. That night, she sat in the corner of their bedroom while Dominic snored beside her, unaware. Her laptop was open. On the screen was a timeline, every contribution she had made to his business. Capital transferred, designs drafted, contracts negotiated. She labeled everything meticulously, like a historian preserving the truth for the day it would be challenged. When she was done, she stared at the folder for a long moment and whispered to herself, "I know exactly what I'm worth." The next morning, she met with a discreet lawyer referred by an old classmate. They sat across each other in a quiet, private office, Mara dressed in her usual modest wear, clutching a leather file. "I'm not filing anything," she said. "Not yet. I just want to know what my options are." The lawyer, a calm woman named Barrister Ifioma, nodded and reviewed the materials Mara had compiled. Her eyebrows rose more than once. "You funded nearly 70% of this company's inception, Mrs. Nwachukwu. In the land, that's prime real estate. You have more leverage than you think." Mara exhaled, her grip tightening slightly on the armrest. "He thinks I'm stupid, that I'll walk away quietly when he hands me the papers. But I'm not walking away empty-handed." Ifioma smiled softly. "Good, let's make sure of that." As Mara left the office that day, the sun felt different on her skin. She walked taller, not because the pain had lessened, but because she had finally seen it clearly. And soon, Dominic would too. Mara didn't change overnight, but there was a shift. A quiet shedding of naivety, replaced by poise sharpened by betrayal. She no longer tried to win Dominic's attention. Instead, she withdrew completely from his orbit. When he came home late, she didn't ask where he'd been. When he left early, she didn't offer breakfast. Her silence was no longer a plea for peace, it was strategy. She began dressing differently, not for seduction, but for command. Sharp blazers replaced her soft cardigans. Neutral tones, flat shoes. She moved with intention. She opened a new email address under her maiden name, hired a second lawyer to review the transfer of property from years back, and connected with a private investigator through Barrister Ifioma. He was a retired police officer named Inspector Ken, sharp-eyed and loyal. "I need discretion," Mara told him. He nodded. Ma'am, I've seen women fall apart over less. But you're building something. I'll help you build it right. Inspector Ken began trailing Dominic's activities. Within days, he had photos of Dominic at dinners, hotel check-ins, and private parties with the same woman, a popular lifestyle influencer named Sonia Ade. Meanwhile, Mara kept her routine intact, smiling at neighbors, attending church, running errands. But at night, she reviewed Ken's reports and archived every file. In one of the surveillance clips, Dominic is heard telling Sonia, "She thinks I'm still investing in us. But truth is, I'm done pretending." Mara paused that video and stared at his face on the screen, so smug, so certain. She didn't cry, didn't scream. Instead, she whispered, "Thank you for making it so easy." With Ifeoma's help, she also started updating her personal financial footprint, separating herself quietly from every joint account. It wasn't revenge, it was preservation. And for the first time in a long while, Mara felt powerful. Not loud, not bitter, powerful. Because she no longer needed Dominic to validate her existence. She was moving ahead, in silence but with fire. "I have a summit in Kigali," Dominic announced one Saturday morning as he packed a sleek overnight bag in the bedroom. 3 days, investors, it's a big deal. Mara nodded from the doorway, arms folded. "Sounds important. Safe travels." She didn't ask questions. She didn't protest. That unsettled him. "You don't even want to know who I'm meeting?" he asked, glancing at her. She smiled slightly. "No need. You'll tell me what you want me to hear anyway." He blinked, caught off guard. "What's that supposed to mean?" She turned and walked out without answering. The driver honked. Dominic zipped up his bag and left without another word. As his car disappeared down the road, Mara pulled out her phone and sent a simple message to Inspector Ken. "Follow him." Discreetly. Full report. 3 days later, Ken returned with more than she had expected. Not only had Dominic not gone to Kigali, but he had also stayed in a luxury resort in Lagos with Sonia, private villa, romantic dinners, and company funds paying for everything. Photos, receipts, audio clips, the proof was irrefutable. He used the business credit card, Ken said. Left a trail a child could follow. Mara's fingers tightened around the evidence. She stared at one photo, Dominic feeding Sonia dessert at a candlelit table. It was almost comical how brazen he was. Later that evening, Dominic returned, full of fake exhaustion. Ugh, that trip was hell. Delayed flights. Long meetings. Mara handed him a glass of water. "Hope you closed the deal." He nodded. "Of course. We're expanding into East Africa next quarter." She smiled. Impressive. He didn't notice her eyes, sharper, colder. She didn't need to accuse him. That would be giving him too much. No, she'd let him build his lies higher. That way, when they came crashing down, the fall would be that much louder. It was a Friday evening when Dominic casually dropped the envelope on the coffee table. Mara had just finished arranging freshly washed sheets when he spoke. "Let's not make this a big thing," he began, loosening his tie as he sat. "I've been thinking. It's time we go our separate ways." Peacefully. Mara said nothing. He reached for the envelope. "These are the divorce papers. No drama, no noise. I've arranged a fair settlement. You'll be fine." He leaned back like he'd just closed a successful negotiation. "This doesn't mean I don't appreciate what we had. But we've grown apart, and I want to live freely now. I don't want the weight of marriage anymore." Mara lifted her gaze slowly. "Wait?" He chuckled, awkwardly. "Come on, Mara. Don't make this emotional. It's just time." She took the envelope, opened it, scanned the pages. It was clean, deliberately so. No mention of the land. No assets in her name. Nothing of substance. He was certain she'd walk away quietly. Mara folded the document neatly and set it beside her. "All right," she said softly. Dominic blinked. "All right," she nodded, rising to her feet. "You want out. You have it." Her tone was serene, but her mind raced. He thought she'd be broken, that she'd cling or cry. He didn't realize she was already 5 steps ahead. That night, while Dominic watched football in the living room, Mara emailed Barrister Ifeoma. "He's made his move. Let's begin." She sent over the full dossier, surveillance files, phone data, voice notes, and financial trails. In a separate message, she added, "Please prepare a response. I will not be leaving empty-handed." Meanwhile, Dominic sat on the couch grinning, texting Sonia. She signed without a word. "I told you she wouldn't fight back." And just like that, he walked into his own trap, set not by a bitter woman, but by one who knew exactly what she was worth, and who was done staying quiet. The office of Barrister Ifioma was tucked inside a quiet commercial complex, far from the kind of places Dominic would ever glance twice at. That was intentional. When Mara walked in that Monday morning, she wasn't the same woman who once waited for Dominic to come home. She came prepared, holding a laptop bag with labeled folders and a USB drive. Barrister Ifioma looked up from her desk with a nod of approval. "I've been reviewing the divorce papers," she began. "There's nothing in there for you, Mara. No mention of joint assets, no clause on the land. It's designed to wipe you out." Mara nodded calmly. "That's why we'll respond differently. He wants a quiet exit. I want full disclosure, publicly if necessary." She opened her laptop and began sharing files, investment receipts, building permits, early loan agreements, contracts with her signature. The pile grew as Ifioma examined each with professional interest. "You did more than support him," she said. "You co-built this entire company." Mara's tone was even. "And now I intend to collect what's mine." By afternoon, they were joined by a forensic accountant and a second legal consultant, a quiet man named Tund who specialized in asset recovery. He reviewed Mara's compiled data and leaned back thoughtfully. "He never expected you to fight," he said, "which means he left trails. Men like him always do." Mara remained composed. "I don't want vengeance. I just want truth. He used me, manipulated me, and erased me. I want that corrected in court." Tunde nodded. "Then we'll begin with a financial breakdown. We trace every payment, every shared decision, and tie it back to you." While the legal team strategized, Mara remained present but quiet, taking notes, asking sharp questions, holding her emotions in check. She wasn't mourning a marriage anymore. She was preparing for a reckoning. She knew she couldn't stop Dominic from telling his version of events. But when the time came, her version would not be a whisper. It would be documented, undeniable, and devastating. And this time, she wouldn't be edited out. Later that week, Mara met with a digital evidence consultant who specialized in voice authentication and timeline correlation. The small office smelled faintly of soldered wires and warm coffee. She handed over the burner phone and the USB drive to a young technician named Chaik, who immediately got to work. "We'll enhance these voice notes, confirm the timestamps, and extract metadata to prove location and device ID," he explained. Mara sat quietly in the corner, arms folded, eyes sharp. One of the voice notes crackled through the speakers, Dominic's laugh followed by. She handed over her father's land like candy. "I didn't even have to ask twice." Chaik looked up, eyebrows raised. "Ma'am, this isn't just proof. It's character assassination, by his own mouth." Mara leaned forward. "Can we isolate his voice?" Chaik nodded. "We can enhance and match it with public videos of him speaking. It will hold in court. Trust me." That's all she needed. Meanwhile, Barrister Ifioma compiled a narrative around the recordings, pairing Dominic's admissions with official documentation. It was a devastating picture. Her lawyer's voice was steady as she explained the next steps. "We file for injunctive relief to pause asset transfers. Then we bring this to the judge at the first hearing. But Mara, once this enters court, it will get ugly. He will retaliate." Mara closed her eyes for a moment. "I don't need peace from him. I just need justice." That evening, back at home, she passed Dominic in the hallway. He was humming, texting someone on his phone, barely registering her presence. "You okay?" he asked offhandedly. "You've been so quiet lately." Mara gave him a long, unreadable look. "I'm just watching," she replied. He laughed and walked on, never once glancing back. Upstairs, she locked her room door, slid the USB into her safe, and whispered, "You'll hear me soon enough." The next few weeks turned into a display Mara watched from a distance, a parade of public affection, curated to humiliate her without a single direct insult. Dominic and Sonia began appearing everywhere. Business luncheons, industry panels, fashion events. Their photos flooded social media. Sonia, dressed in tight dresses and flawless makeup, held Dominic's arm like a trophy. She was now his visible partner, both in his life and increasingly in his company. A business magazine published an article titled "The Power Couple Behind DN Global." The cover featured Dominic and Sonia clinking glasses in a rooftop photo shoot. Mara saw it by accident in a mall and stood there for minutes, reading every caption. Her name wasn't mentioned once, not even in the founding history. It was as though she had never existed. She bought the magazine, took it home, and placed it beside her court folder. Another piece of evidence. Another reason to keep going. Amaka called her one evening, voice full of cautious outrage. "Mara, have you seen the new video?" He introduced her as the creative heartbeat of his company at a tech award gala. They kissed on stage. People were cheering. "What is this madness?" Mara was calm. "It's noise. Let him dance." "But aren't you angry?" Amaka asked. "Doesn't it hurt?" Mara's voice was low. "It does, but I won't bleed publicly." She ended the call and opened her laptop. Her legal team had begun drafting a motion to subpoena all corporate financial records. Every public display Dominic put on became part of her strategy. She saved the footage, bookmarked the posts, and handed everything to her lawyers. In every caption, every edited press release, Dominic erased her. But the truth was buried beneath all that glitter, and when it came out, it wouldn't just reveal the betrayal. It would collapse the performance, one carefully crafted lie at a time. The letter came by courier, thick, official, and bearing the emblem of the High Court. Mara accepted it with a steady hand and closed the door behind her. She walked to the dining table, opened it slowly, and unfolded the date. Initial hearing, May 3rd. Her eyes rested on the names printed in cold black ink, Dominic Nwachukwu versus Mara Nwachukwu. She didn't flinch. Instead, she picked up her phone and called Barrister Ifeoma. "It's here," she said simply. "Good," Ifeoma replied. Now he's invited the law into his lie. We'll bring the truth. Mara's legal team had already prepared their cross motion, a request for asset investigation, voice evidence admission, and a stay on all company financial transactions. That same day, the media caught wind of the filing. At first, they painted it as a typical divorce between a wealthy businessman and a quiet wife. But Dominic, ever performative, went a step further, hiring a PR firm to twist the narrative. Dominic's interview aired on a weekday evening. He sat in a studio, polished and confident. "Mara's a great woman," he said, folding his hands like a grieving widower. "But she was never really part of my business journey. She was just supportive, domestically. And I wish her the best." The anchor smiled. "So the business was all your creation?" Dominic nodded. "From scratch, from zero, blood and sweat." Mara watched it from her lawyer's office. Tunde, the asset consultant, stared at the screen in disbelief. "He's doubling down on the lie," he muttered. Mara reached for the remote and muted the volume. "Let him speak," she said. "The more he claims, the harder the fall." That evening, she typed out a quiet statement and sent it to Ifeoma. "I still choose silence, until the court asks for my voice. Then I'll answer once, with proof." The countdown had begun, and the louder Dominic grew, the more deafening her quiet became. 2 nights before the court hearing, Mara drove out of the city without telling anyone. She arrived at her father's old compound, the place where the land once stretched wide and untouched, now buried under concrete and high rises. The new development glimmered under street lamps, but Mara ignored the buildings. She walked past them, through the rear gate, and toward the single tree her father had planted decades ago. It was still standing. She sat beneath it, removing her heels, pressing her palm into the soil. Memories flooded her, the evenings her father would sit on the porch with her, his voice calm but firm. "Don't ever let love blind you from ownership. A man who needs your help but hides your name doesn't love you. He uses you." She had been too young then to understand the weight of those words. Now they returned like thunder. Tears slipped down her cheeks, not out of weakness, but for the girl who hadn't known better. "Daddy," she whispered, "I gave it all to him. Even the land you warned me to guard. I wanted to believe we were building something together." The wind rustled the leaves, and she closed her eyes, feeling both grief and grit in the same breath. After sitting in silence for an hour, she stood and walked back to her car, wiping her face with her sleeve. As she started the engine, her phone buzzed. A message from Barrister Ifeoma. "The judge will allow physical evidence to be submitted during your response. Are you ready?" Mara stared at the screen, then replied, "I've been ready since the day he thought I was nothing." She drove back in darkness, her mind clear, her heart no longer heavy. She wasn't going to court to defend herself. She was going to expose the truth, for her father, for herself, and for every quiet woman erased by a man who took her voice for granted. The morning before the hearing, a video went viral. Sonia, with her usual smug confidence, had posted a behind-the-scenes clip of herself and Dominic laughing in a dressing room. "Court tomorrow," she said with a wink to the camera. "Pray for the ex-wife. She might faint when she sees my outfit." Laughter followed. Dominic appeared in the background, adjusting his tie. "Tell her not to wear black like a widow," he joked. The clip racked up thousands of views in hours, drawing both admiration and criticism. Amaka sent the video to Mara immediately. "You need to see this," her message read. Mara watched it once, then calmly archived the clip into her legal folder. It was petty, vile, but it helped her. The court would see the true face behind Dominic's public charm. And Sonia had just exposed herself as an accessory to humiliation. Every smirk they broadcasted would echo louder once the truth unfolded. While the internet debated whether Sonia's taunt was shade or savagery, Mara ironed her simple court dress in silence. She didn't need glamour. She needed dignity. As she laid her outfit out on the bed, her phone buzzed again. A news notification this time. Dominic Nwachukwu expected in court for high-profile divorce battle. Sources say the case involves hidden assets. She took a breath, turned off the TV, and sat by the window with her journal. Some women scream. Others stay silent until the room is forced to listen, she wrote. That evening, Dominic came home later than usual. He didn't say a word to her, just breezed past her, humming, confident. She watched him without speaking. "You have no idea what's coming," she thought. As he slept soundly beside her that night, Mara remained wide awake, rehearsing nothing, because the truth required no performance. Tomorrow wasn't the end of her silence. It was the beginning of his unraveling. The courthouse loomed ahead like a stone monument of reckoning. Mara stepped out of the car slowly, her heels clicking softly on the tiled floor as she entered. She wore a plain navy dress and carried a thin leather file under her arm, no entourage, no theatrics. Dominic arrived minutes later, escorted by his lawyer and 2 aides. He was dressed in a designer suit, grinning for the flashing cameras, whispering to Sonia, who trailed him in a muted lavender pantsuit, her eyes scanning the press. Reporters buzzed, asking, "Is it true your wife wants a piece of the company she didn't build?" Dominic only smiled. Inside the courtroom, the tension was palpable. Barrister Ifioma leaned toward Mara and whispered, "Stay composed. They'll try to provoke emotion. Don't flinch." Mara nodded, folding her hands in her lap. When Dominic walked in and saw her already seated, he did a double take. She didn't look like someone begging to be rescued. She looked like someone ready to be heard. The judge, an older woman with a sharp gaze, called the court to order. Dominic's lawyer began with confidence, painting Dominic as a self-made man whose supportive but uninvolved wife had no business making claims to his assets. "My client built DN Global from the ground up," the lawyer said. "Mrs. Nwachukwu has no legal ownership of any stake. Her role was entirely domestic." Mara remained motionless, her expression unreadable. Dominic stole occasional glances at her, confused by her calm. Sonia sat in the back row, smirking, twirling her braids. Barrister Ifioma took notes, not reacting, while Tunde highlighted documents in preparation. The first hour of proceedings was dry, procedural formalities, submissions of financial statements, and timelines. Still, Mara didn't speak. She listened, observed, stored every lie for later. When the court broke for a brief recess, Dominic walked past Mara's bench and muttered, "You're wasting everyone's time. This won't change anything." She looked up at him slowly and said, "We'll see." It was the first time she'd spoken to him in weeks. It was enough to make him pause. When the court resumed, Dominic took the stand. His tone was polished, his words rehearsed. "My company was born from pure grit," he said, projecting confidence. "I started it alone. There were no partners, no co-founders. My wife supported me emotionally, yes, but she was never part of the operations. She didn't even understand the logistics." He chuckled softly as if sharing an inside joke with the courtroom. His lawyer chimed in, "Mrs. Nwachukwu's sudden interest in this case stems more from bitterness than contribution. There's no record of her involvement in any official company documents. It was a clever tactic to make Mara seem desperate, clinging. The judge listened carefully, occasionally making notes. Dominic was in his element. His charm worked on most rooms, and today he leaned into it fully. He even addressed the judge directly at times. Your Honor, I loved her, truly. But this is about business. And this company is mine. Barrister Ifioma remained calm. She didn't object. Not yet. Mara sat upright, expression unchanged. When asked if she had anything to say, she declined for now. The judge tilted her head. You've had the floor, Mr. Nwachukwu, she said. We will return to this after cross-examination. Dominic stepped down, confident that he had just sealed the narrative. In the hallway, during a brief recess, Sonia handed him a bottle of water. You were brilliant, she whispered. She looked like a statue. Dominic smirked. She has nothing, no proof. This is just noise. What he didn't see was Barrister Ifioma approaching the clerk with a request to submit evidence under seal. The storm hadn't begun, but it was forming. And while Dominic basked in the illusion of control, Mara sat in quiet anticipation, her file of receipts, recordings, and deeds still unopened. She hadn't spoken, not yet, but the silence wasn't defeat. It was strategy, and the courtroom hadn't seen anything yet. By the third day of the hearing, there was a shift in the room, subtle but undeniable. Dominic's voice had been loud, his statements bold. But the judge's expression was beginning to harden. The list of contradictions in his testimonies was growing. Meanwhile, Mara's side had filed for a deeper audit. No one had expected that from the quiet wife. At home, Dominic began pacing more, making calls at odd hours. She's bluffing, he told his friend over the phone. She doesn't have anything. Sonia, however, had begun to grow tense. What if she's playing the long game? She asked one night, wrapping her arms around his neck. You know her better than anyone. Would she walk into court this calm? With nothing? Dominic waved her off. She's bluffing. She always folds. But even as he said it, doubt began to creep in, a small flicker behind his confident exterior. He hadn't seen her flinch once, not even during his public betrayal. Back at Mara's apartment, the night before her testimony, she stood in front of the mirror. Not to practice what she'd say, she didn't need a script. She just needed composure. Amaka visited briefly, holding her hands tightly. Are you sure about this? Once you speak, everything changes. Mara nodded. I'm not afraid anymore. I was for a long time, but silence has done enough damage. That night, Mara sat on the floor beside her bed, reviewing one last file. She closed the folder and leaned back against the wall. She wasn't just defending her dignity. She was correcting the narrative. When the judge finally asked the right question, she would answer with more than words. She would answer with truth. And when that moment came, there would be no recovery for Dominic. He had mistaken silence for weakness. What he failed to realize was that silence, in the right hands, could be a loaded weapon. The courtroom settled into a quiet hush. The judge adjusted her glasses and looked directly at Mara. Mrs. Nwachukwu, she said, her voice measured, we've heard from your husband's counsel. You've remained silent through much of this process. But now I must ask who funded the founding phase of DN Global. All eyes turned to her. Dominic folded his arms, confident. Sonia smirked behind him. Mara stood up slowly, clasping her hands in front of her. She spoke clearly, without emotion, every syllable deliberate. I did, she said, and I have the video to prove it. A quiet murmur rippled across the room. The judge raised a brow. You have evidence? Mara turned to Barrister Ifioma, who handed a labeled USB drive to the clerk. Yes, Your Honor. A series of recordings and matched financial documents that directly link my personal land and private funds to the company's foundation. The lights dimmed slightly as the projector screen came to life. The first voice to fill the courtroom was Dominic's, laughing, bragging. She gave me the land like candy. Doesn't even know what she's worth. His second clip followed, another call, this time to a colleague. I didn't even need to lie much. She signed it all over. It's mine now. Faces shifted in the courtroom. Sonia's smirk vanished. Dominic's posture stiffened. He began whispering urgently to his lawyer, who looked pale. When the final clip ended, Mara stepped forward with a file. These are the original deed transfer records, property valuation, the loan applications using the land as collateral, and my bank statements, all from the same period. My name may not be on the company registration, but my signature is on every brick. For the first time since the trial began, Dominic had nothing to say. The judge leaned back in her chair. We'll need a full forensic audit of all founding capital and transactions, she said. Then, addressing Dominic, and you'll remain under oath. Mara sat back down, her expression calm. Dominic's entire body language shifted. The lie had cracked, and the courtroom was no longer his stage. Silence had finally spoken, and it roared louder than anything he'd ever said. The courtroom exploded into motion the moment the judge adjourned for recess. Reporters rushed out to break the news. Tech mogul exposed by wife in court, headlines read within minutes. Dominic's lawyer rushed toward the bench, asking for a recess extension. We need time to review the new materials, he pleaded. The judge refused. You've had your turn, she replied sternly. This court will proceed with the audit immediately. Dominic turned to Mara, his confidence eroded. Where did you get that recording? He hissed. She didn't look at him. Where you left it, she replied. In your arrogance. Sonia looked panicked. She pulled Dominic aside. This can't go public. You need to fix this now. Apologize. Settle. But Dominic wasn't listening. His eyes darted around, calculating, unraveling. He never imagined the woman he dismissed as mild and meek could bring down everything he built on stolen ground. Meanwhile, Barrister Efioma met with the court's forensic audit officer and submitted the full documentation. All transactions have been time-stamped and verified, she said. We're requesting a stay on all company disbursements until the investigation is complete. The judge nodded. Approved. No movement of company assets, no account withdrawals, and no dividend payouts until this court says otherwise. Dominic's jaw clenched. He realized that not only was his image collapsing, his control over DN Global was slipping away. Outside the courtroom, the crowd had grown. Cameramen swarmed, pushing microphones at everyone who exited. When Mara walked out, her face composed, a journalist asked, Mrs. Nwachukwu, how long have you had this evidence? She paused, then answered simply, long enough to know I wouldn't be silenced anymore. She didn't stay for more questions. Inside the car, she looked at her reflection in the window. For the first time in years, she didn't see someone waiting to be chosen. She saw the woman who had always known her worth, even when no one else did. The next hearing reconvened under a tense atmosphere. This time, the court clerk began by distributing printed copies of the original property deed, with Mara's late father's name, her inheritance transfer, and Dominic's name added after a signed waiver. The courtroom murmured again. Barrister Efioma stood. Your Honor, the land used to secure the foundational capital for DN Global was never Dominic Nwachukwu's asset. It was Mara's family inheritance, handed over in trust, not relinquished as a gift. He claimed ownership under deception. The judge examined the document carefully. And this was never disclosed in the business filings, she asked. Tund rose. Not once, Your Honor. In fact, this deed was omitted from the company's list of initial assets submitted to the Corporate Affairs Commission. The judge's eyes narrowed. Then Mr. Nwachukwu not only omitted a critical asset, he knowingly concealed a false origin of funding. Dominic's mouth went dry. His lawyer frantically shuffled through the files. There was no rebuttal. Mara sat quietly, her gaze steady as the weight of the truth settled over the courtroom. The land her father had died protecting was now the very thread unraveling Dominic's empire. This deed, Barrister Efioma added, was the difference between rejection and approval of his first bank loan. Without it, there would be no DN Global. Dominic tried to interject. She gave it to me willingly, but the judge raised a hand. That's not the issue. The issue is what you did with it, and how you erased her. The court fell into silence. The audit officer stepped forward. We have traced a financial trail directly linking the collateral value of the land to a disbursement of $48 million in startup capital, approved under your name, but secured by her estate. Dominic sat down slowly, shaken. He looked across the room at Mara this time, truly seeing her. Not as his wife, not as a threat, but as the one person who could destroy everything he thought was secure. And she had done it without raising her voice. The courtroom now operated under a new tone, one of forensic detail, not theatrical displays. 2 independent auditors were sworn in and tasked with combing through DN Global's financial records from the very beginning. The process was meticulous. They reviewed every invoice, every contract, and every capital injection in chronological order. On day one of the audit presentation, the courtroom listened as the lead auditor, Mr. Akande, stood before the judge. Our preliminary findings indicate that over 68% of DN Global's foundational funding came from the sale and leveraged value of the property registered under Mrs. Nwachukwu's name. There is also documented proof of recurring direct transfers from her personal accounts, totaling $22.6 million over the first 8 months of operations. The room was silent. Dominic's lawyer visibly stiffened. "Your Honor, we request time to prepare a counter-financial analysis." The judge replied curtly, "You had time. You chose spin instead of evidence. We will proceed." Outside the courtroom, Dominic began to unravel. He shouted at his legal team in the hallway, ignoring Sonia's attempts to calm him. "How did she even get access to these documents? I kept everything locked." Sonia pulled him aside, voice sharp. "That's the problem. You underestimated her. You thought she'd never fight back." Dominic sneered. "She's nothing without me." Sonia stepped back. "Then explain how nothing just stripped the skin off your company's finances." Meanwhile, back at the apartment, Mara sat with her team reviewing the transcripts from court. Tunde looked up and said, "Every lie he built this company on is being stripped away, not by fire, but by facts." Mara nodded. "It's not revenge I want. I just want the truth documented. Let the world see who built what." She looked at the printed audit charts on the table. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about dignity, the kind that no longer begged to be seen, but demanded it with proof. It began with whispers, internal Slack messages, and hushed boardroom conversations. But within 48 hours of the court's audit revelation, DN Global's investor community erupted into a full-blown panic. An anonymous leak to a financial blog triggered the fallout. The headline read, "CEO built empire on fraudulent claim. Wife owns the ground beneath the company." The article included excerpts from the court testimony and a screenshot of Dominic's recorded confession. One by one, major stakeholders began pulling out. First, it was the software vendor. Then the logistics partner. Then the lead angel investor posted a carefully worded statement online. DN Global misrepresented critical components of its origin story. We are suspending all collaboration until legal clarity is achieved. Dominic saw it from his office and slammed his laptop shut. His assistant walked in timidly. "Sir, the board wants an emergency meeting." He waved her off. "Cancel it, all of them." Meanwhile, Sonia sat alone in the lounge of a media house. Her interview had just been canceled. The producer had politely informed her they could no longer associate with her brand until her image was no longer entangled in litigation. She called Dominic. "Everything's falling apart. You need to do damage control." His voice was hoarse. "It's too late. They think she owns the company now. I'm bleeding credibility." Sonia paused, then said softly, "Maybe you should talk to her. Publicly apologize. Admit what you did, before it gets worse." But Dominic's pride refused to bend. "Apologize. To the woman who sat quiet while plotting to ruin me?" Sonia didn't respond. She knew what Dominic couldn't admit. Mara hadn't ruined him. He did that himself. Back at Mara's apartment, her phone buzzed constantly, interview requests, sponsorship offers, even a book deal proposal. She declined them all. She hadn't come for attention. She had come for accountability. And with each investor walking away from Dominic, she was getting exactly that. The courtroom was packed for the final ruling. Lawyers, journalists, and spectators crowded in, eager for the verdict. The judge's voice cut through the room with authority. After careful review of the evidence, financial documentation, recorded confessions, and witness testimony, this court finds that Mrs. Mara Nwachukwu made significant contributions to the foundation and growth of DN Global. Dominic stared blankly ahead, shoulders slumped. The judge continued, "This court rules in favor of Mrs. Nwachukwu. She is entitled to 60% ownership of DN Global, full reinstatement of her property rights, and a financial settlement for intellectual contributions and reputational damage." A gasp moved through the courtroom like a wave. Mara didn't flinch. She simply closed her eyes for a brief second, breathing it in. Not triumph, not vengeance, closure. Dominic stood trembling. "This isn't fair," he muttered. "She betrayed me." The judge didn't spare him a glance. What's unfair is building a life on someone else's sacrifice and erasing them from the history of it. Sonia had already left the room quietly. She hadn't looked back once. Barrister Ifioma turned to Mara, her face soft. "It's done," Mara nodded. "No, it's just beginning." As they exited the courtroom, a reporter approached Mara. "How does it feel to have taken back everything?" Mara smiled faintly. "I didn't take anything. I reclaimed what was already mine." Flashbulbs lit up around her, but she kept walking. No grand gestures, no quotes for the headlines. She had no need to gloat. Justice had spoken for her. And for the first time in years, she was no longer part of Dominic's shadow. She had stepped into her own light, and this time it was documented for all to see. The aftermath of the ruling sent tremors far beyond the courtroom. While Dominic struggled to contain the fallout, Sonia had already made her decision. By the next morning, her social media accounts were wiped clean. No more photos of Dominic, no more cryptic captions, no more luxury flaunting. Her PR team issued a brief statement. "Miss Sonia Aide is no longer affiliated with Mr. Dominic Nwachukwu, personally or professionally. We wish all parties well." It was cold, clinical, and final. Dominic called her repeatedly. The line rang, unanswered. On the third attempt, it went straight to voicemail. "Sonia, pick up. Don't do this. We can still fix it. Don't run." But she wasn't listening. The illusion had shattered. She had aligned herself with a man whose empire was now built on public disgrace. And in the world of image and influence, that kind of scandal was a death sentence. At his home, once pristine and full of staff, Dominic sat alone, surrounded by silence. His office line rang continuously, but no one picked up anymore. His assistant had resigned. Sponsors had withdrawn. The board had issued a statement distancing themselves from his leadership. He scrolled through old videos of himself, award shows, interviews, business panels, where he stood tall, confident, praised. But now, all of that felt like a lie playing in slow motion. His phone buzzed once more, a news alert. DN Global founder loses control of company after wife proves ownership. He hurled the phone across the room, breathing heavily. In a moment of desperation, he opened Sonia's chat and typed, "Please. I'm sorry. I didn't think it would go this far." But the message never showed, delivered. She had blocked him, and in the sudden void she left, he felt what he had refused to feel for years. Abandonment. It was finally his turn to be left behind. In a last-ditch attempt to salvage his image, Dominic released a public video. He sat in front of a white wall, eyes red, voice hoarse. "To my supporters, I've made mistakes. To my investors, I've let you down. And to Mara, my ex-wife, I was wrong. Took you for granted. You believed in me when no one else did. You built with me. I should have honored that." The comments section flooded instantly, some offering sympathy, most with scathing responses. "Too little, too late. Apologize in court, not online. You laughed at her. Now the world is laughing back." Dominic turned off his screen before the backlash fully consumed him. He had thought remorse would buy him redemption. But the public wasn't interested in sorrow. They wanted accountability. And Mara? She didn't even acknowledge the video. She didn't need to. The silence that once buried her was now his. At a women's business forum that week, Mara was invited as a guest. She sat quietly at a panel until the moderator finally asked, "What gave you the courage to fight?" Mara leaned forward and replied, "I didn't fight. I exposed. There's a difference." The room fell silent. A woman in the audience stood and clapped. Then another. Then more. They weren't just applauding her victory, they were celebrating her dignity. Dominic watched the video clip from his now empty office. The applause rang through his speakers like thunder. He couldn't look away. "She never even raised her voice," he whispered to himself. She didn't have to. Outside, protesters gathered with placards about financial justice and women's rights. Mara had become something more than his ex-wife. She was a symbol, and Dominic, once a star, had become a footnote in her story of quiet strength and undeniable worth. Mara's first visit to DN Global's headquarters under her ownership was quiet, unannounced. There were no press releases, no balloons, no cameras. She wore a gray suit and low heels, her hair pulled into a simple bun. Staff paused when she entered. Some stood awkwardly, unsure whether to greet her as the woman who had once walked in beside Dominic or the woman who now legally owned the space. Mara broke the silence with a nod. "Good morning," she said gently. "Please continue what you were doing." The receptionist blinked. "Would you like your name on the door, ma'am?" Mara glanced at the glass panel that still bore Dominic's. She shook her head. "No, let the work speak louder than the name." She walked through the hallway, observing, listening, taking mental notes. This time, she wasn't behind the curtain. She was at the helm. In the conference room, she met with the interim board. They stood to greet her, unsure how she'd run things. She eased into her seat and said, "I'm not here to replace people. I'm here to repair direction." One of the board members cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we were misled. We believed his version. We didn't know." Mara didn't offer resentment. "What matters is what you do now that you know." She reviewed reports, budget forecasts, and company culture concerns. There was no vengeance in her decisions, only structure, efficiency, and empathy. By the end of the day, a new tone had been set. DN Global would not be a place of manipulation, but one of merit. As she stepped into the elevator to leave, a junior employee hurried after her. "Mrs. Nwachukwu," she said breathlessly, "thank you for not giving up." Mara turned, smiled gently, and replied, "We don't rise by making noise. We rise by knowing when to speak and speaking with truth." The doors slid shut. She was no longer a whisper in the background. She was the calm that replaced the storm. The invitation was unexpected, a formal request from a major media outlet for Mara to speak at a televised press conference. For weeks, she had declined interviews, sidestepped magazine covers, and rejected publishing deals. But now, after reflection and advice from Barrister Ifioma, she agreed. "One interview," she said firmly. "No drama, just clarity." The event was held at a small auditorium, with no flashy banners or flashing lights, just a simple backdrop that read, "Truth in Business." As Mara stepped onto the platform in a cream blouse and wide-legged trousers, the room hushed. Cameras pointed. Journalists leaned forward. The moderator smiled warmly. "Mrs. Nwachukwu, thank you for being here. The world has watched your story unfold. May we ask, why did you wait so long to speak?" Mara clasped her hands together and replied, "Because silence isn't always surrender. Sometimes it's a form of power. I waited because the truth needed time to form, not noise." The questions that followed weren't all gentle. One reporter asked, "Do you believe Dominic deserves forgiveness?" Mara paused. "Forgiveness is personal. Justice is public." This journey wasn't about punishing him. It was about restoring what was mine. Another asked, "What would you say to women in your position?" Her eyes softened. "Don't rush to be loud. Be clear. Document everything. Protect your name. And know that love should never cost you your legacy." Applause rose, not from her delivery, but from the weight of her words. When the session ended, several young women approached her backstage. "You changed how I see myself," one whispered. "You made me feel seen." Mara hugged her gently and said, "Then I've already won." Outside, as cameras flashed and the world watched, Mara didn't wave or smile for attention. She simply walked to her car, closed the door behind her, and breathed. The story wasn't about exposure anymore. It was about endurance, and the kind of victory that didn't need validation. A month later, Mara stood once again on her father's land, now part of a thriving development anchored by the company she reclaimed. The sun was low, casting a soft gold over the rows of new buildings. She had returned not as a wife, not as a litigant, but as a woman who had come full circle. She walked slowly to the old tree, the one that had stood through time, storms, and silence. Her heels sank slightly into the dirt as she knelt beside it. She brought a small framed photo from her purse, her father holding her as a child. "I did it, Daddy," she whispered. "I didn't fight for revenge. I fought to protect what you left me. And I didn't let him erase it." A light breeze passed through the branches. In that moment, Mara didn't feel anger. She felt peace. Not because everything had been restored, but because she had proven, to herself, that she had never been lost in the first place. Later that evening, she hosted a quiet dinner, no press, no grand speeches. Just close friends, her legal team, Amaka, and a few women she had mentored in recent weeks. They sat under warm lights, eating and laughing, not as people recovering from a storm, but as ones who had outlived it. Amaka raised a glass. "To Mara," she said, eyes glistening. "To the woman who showed us that silence doesn't mean weakness, and that when truth finally speaks, the world must listen." Mara clinked glasses and smiled. "To building things that last, not just on land, but on character." That night, when she lay in bed, she stared at the ceiling with a deep sense of satisfaction. Dominic was no longer a chapter in her life. He was a lesson, and the empire he tried to own alone would forever carry the proof of who really laid the foundation. Not with ego, not with deceit, but with faith, quiet strength, and undeniable truth. The end. Here's the Bible verse for the story, Luke 8, verse 17, NIV. "For there is nothing hidden that will not be disclosed, and nothing concealed that will not be known or brought out into the open." This verse reflects the central truth of Mara's journey, that deception, no matter how well hidden, cannot stand forever. In the end, what was concealed in silence was revealed in justice. Moral of the story: never mistake silence for weakness, nor loyalty for ignorance. The quiet ones often carry the deepest strength. Mara's story teaches that dignity, preparation, and truth have a power that outlasts betrayal. In a world obsessed with appearances, let your character speak louder than your voice, and when the time comes, speak with undeniable evidence. That's the end of the story. What did you learn from this story? Drop your thoughts in the comments section. Leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on post notification so that you'll be notified whenever we drop our next videos. Also, share this video to someone who might be interested. Thank you so much for watching.